Lenihan, Tom McCarthy and John Lenihan have long been associated with sport in the parish of Ballymckelliget. Here is the story of John Lenihan. John Lenihan was born on October 13, 1960. A tiny baby born prematurely, it was felt among the medical staff that he would not survive. However, survive he did, despite all the odds. His dad's parents were a Protestant Catholic combination, and his mother's parents were a Protestant and Methodist combination. And now there was about to be more confusion added to the mix. As with baby John unlikely to live and no Protestant minister quickly available, it was agreed to have a Catholic priest quickly present his prayers and blessings to the young infant. Some weeks later, John was brought home here to Turin, and the young infant thrived on this rugged landscape. In fact, as the years rolled by, the young lad became very much part of this landscape as he learned to track and hunt on the nearby hills, aided and educated in the art by his father. His father Willem was a skilled hunter. As his skills and love of this landscape became more and more part of the boy, it was obvious that his social skills with people was becoming an issue, as he very rarely mixed with other human beings outside of his family. Most of his time was spent around animals on the farm, or out in the hills and woods with the family dogs. Maybe this was what Olympic silver medalist and world cross-country champion John Tracy saw in the young lad, when years later John Tracy wrote the foreword on the tough-as-leather book based on the life of John Lenihan. And Mr. Tracy wrote that on his first meeting with John Lenihan, he described him as almost not tame. John was very well home-educated by his grandmother Annie Lenihan, as his mother Stella had to return to her own home to help her parents run their farm at Flimby, Ballymckelliget. John didn't actually start school until he was 7, but with a solid base behind him from his nightly grinds by his grandmother, he quickly moved up through the classes by skipping 2 classes. He skipped low infants, and then going directly from high infants into 2nd class, thus bringing him up with his own age group. John started school in the old Clogher School, just east of Clogher Church. This school is now a residential house owned by the Scanlon family. After a year, John was moved from the Catholic school at Clogher to the Protestant school in Ballymckelliget, beside the Protestant church. When this school closed a few years later, he moved along with the other students to the school at Astray, Tralee, where he completed his primary school education. It was in no small way due to the education provided at home by his grandmother that John produced such good grades in school, and when he enrolled and completed his enrolling exam at the old technical school near the library in Tralee, he was placed in Year 1, Class A. Even at this age of life, it was clear that he had a competitive approach, which would undoubtedly serve him well later in his sporting career. John's secondary level education started in September and ended 3 months later at the Christmas holidays, when it was decided that John was needed at home on the family farm to help his dad. Anyhow, John didn't need all that fancy education and learning of languages, as he would never be going abroad anyhow, as he was now commencing on life as a farmer here on the slopes of the Stax Mountains. Oh, but how wrong was that theory? While in secondary school, John took no interest in the athletics training, but instead showed huge interest in football, where he showed potential as an accurate shooting forward. So much so that as Christmas approached, John was one of just 2 players selected from the first-year students to travel to Killorglin for the trials for the Kerry Tex football team. However, John's dad felt the risk of injury was too great, and someone with a broken hand or leg would be more of a hindrance than a help around the farm. And as it turned out, despite many approaches to the family from the education department and the local clergy, etc., John did not return to school ever again. That first year on the farm was a bit of a roller coaster for John as he enjoyed the freedom of no more school, the freedom of country life, plus the added bonus of school friends visiting at weekends. This was all about to change as year 2 rolled around, and now, due to the difference in their lifestyles, a void began to grow between John and his former schoolmates. As with little in common, they all began to go their separate ways, and now John began to feel the loneliness of being isolated from his own age group, here in the very rural setting of the Stax Mountains. It was in 1976 into 1977 that John began to develop a love for running, and this led him to taking part in the Under-16 Community Games Marathon in Ballymcalligat, where the so-called marathon was simply a couple of laps of the local football field, and here John finished second, losing out in a sprint finish. This now qualified John for the County Community Games, and with the marathon here around 10k on the road, John fancied his chances over the much longer distance. So he visited Vincent Murphy's sports shop in Castle Island and purchased himself shorts, singlet and shoes, and armed with his new purchase, began training for the County Community Games final. When the day of the marathon arrived, John cycled to the Austin Stax Park in Tralee and waited patiently for the marathon to be called. And it was with pulse racing that John headed for the entrance gate as the runners were called to the start. But here everything was about to go wrong. At the gate, John was stopped by an over-authoritative steward who wanted to know where was John's race number. And of course, John had to admit that he knew nothing about having to wear a number until a few minutes before the race. And despite a frantic search around the discarded numbers, he could not find a Ballymcalligat number among them anywhere, and the steward was not prepared to listen to any excuses. So John was not allowed to take part in the event, and had to watch with tear-filled eyes as the marathon runners headed out the gate for the open road. That incident with the steward was to leave a lingering scepticism towards figures of authority for the rest of John's life. A couple of months later, John took part in his first ever road race, which took place in Castle Island, and here John finished well ahead of the Community Games Marathon silver medalist, and just behind the young lad who had won the gold medal, leaving John to muse over what might have been. However, John was not about to get a chance to dwell too much on that, because that was the night that opened up a whole new chapter of life for the 17-year-old John Lenihan. A chapter that would only close when John had won a world title, being crowned Kerry Sportsperson of the Year, plus voted Jury's Irish Independent Sportsperson of the Week in September 1991. John's athletic career is well documented in Con Dennehy's book, Tough as Leather. So here we will only outline the highlights of a 30-year career. After that race in Castle Island, John joined the newly formed Unreal Athletic Club under the guidance of the Walsh twins Joe and Gerard. John quickly made his way up through the ranks from club runner to county team member, and after a couple of years, John got his first call up for international duty with the Irish team. Cross-country races at Gateshead and Crystal Palace quickly followed, and it was a huge boost for John to be on the team with his hero, John Tracy. John Lenihan went on to win 14 Kerry Senior cross-country titles, plus the Munster cross-country title, and finished with a silver and a bronze medal at the Irish Senior Inter-Counties Cross-Country Championships behind John Tracy and Jerry Deegan on one occasion, and 10 seconds behind Jerry Deegan for silver on another occasion. John also ran for Ireland at the World Cross Country Championships. John did very little track racing. However, his 13 minutes and 55 seconds for the 5,000 metres at the Cork City Sports International event got John drafted into the Irish Olympic panel, and travelled to their training camp in Italy. John won numerous county track titles over 1500 and 5000 metres, plus Munster champion over 5000 metres, and took a bronze medal at the Irish 10,000 metres championships, producing a time of 29 minutes and 36 seconds for the distance. It was on the roads that John really performed at a higher level, and it was unfortunate that the half marathon was not an Olympic event, as it was John's strongest distance. In 1985, Ireland introduced it as a new championship event, and John travelled to Dublin, where he won the inaugural Irish Half Marathon Championship in a time of 63 minutes and 15 seconds, breaking the old course record. And that time still stands today in 2024 as the Irish Championship record almost 40 years later. John competed twice more in the championship, winning another gold and a silver. John travelled to the Isle of Man for the Easter Athletics Festival 3-day event, where he finished third in both the 5-mile road race and the relay race, plus winning the mountain race. John travelled back to the Isle of Man on one other occasion, where he won all 3 events to win the competition outright. It was in the sport of mountain racing, or as it's known in the UK, fell racing, that John really excelled. On his first race up and down Carntool, John knocked 40 minutes off the old record with a time of 1 hour, 11 minutes and 42 seconds, a time that has never been beaten. John went on to win the race 19 times in total. He also won the Snowdon International Mountain Race in Wales, plus also having a second and a third at that event. He was the first Irish athlete to be selected on the Ireland and UK relay team for the Mount Begno International Mountain Racing Relay event near Lake Como in Italy. He won the first ever Strandhill Warriors race in Sligo in the mid-80s and a prize of £1,000. He went on to win it 5 years in a row, and then didn't compete in the event again until he was asked back to start the race for its 21st anniversary. And John did the unbelievable by winning the event again. John went on to represent Ireland at 14 World Championships, taking a number of top 6 placings in the world. But it was in September of 1991 that John really fulfilled his dream by winning the gold at the World Up and Down Championships in Zermatt at the foot of the Matterhorn in Switzerland, plus leading the Irish team to bronze medals. In his career, John raced in New Zealand, South Africa, Alaska, America, Borneo, the island of Reunion, plus all over the UK. Also raced in France, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland and Austria. So much for the young lad that didn't need second-level education or knowledge of other languages, as he was never going to travel too far from his farm here on the Stax Mountains. When people asked John what would he do differently if he could do it all over again, and his reply is, "I wouldn't do anything different. I would just do more of it." When asked what was the outstanding lesson learned from his career, he replied, "When we're competing, we don't realise how small a time frame the window of opportunity of peak performance really is. And remember, while it's nice to be good, it's good to be nice." Today in 2024, John continues to enjoy jogging slowly around the trails here at Lenihan, and also continues to hike the mountains of Ireland and beyond. And only a few years ago, he achieved a lifelong dream by spending 3 weeks in Nepal and hiking to Everest Base Camp. In 2008, John, along with NEKD, now NEWKD, and Fall to Ireland, came together to create a loop walk somewhere in Kerry, and Lenihan was chosen as the location, and John was given the task of planning and designing the route that would take in all the historic locations while also maximising the outstanding scenery that is available from here. Today, Lenihan Walkway, as you know it, is the reward for all the groundwork put in place back in 2008. John is a great believer in the saying that I don't want to arrive at my grave with my body in mint shape. Instead, I want to arrive in a cloud of dust, skidding in sideways with parts falling off and I going, that was one hell of a ride.